Testing, testing, testing. Hi, class. Tonight, we are going to talk about our two cases. The one was Compare.com for the group case, and then we had the individual case called Rocket Fuel. Both of them are intended to give you an understanding of marketing experiments and how they're critical to today's digital marketing analytics. Let's start with the Compare.com. So quick summary, this was the experiment on whether or not certain initiatives like apps, save the quote, or providing an early estimate, the emphasis really on the latter, would have an impact on boosting the response rate for these questionnaires that would lead to a quote on the best alternative for insurance. All right, now, much of this exercise was intended to give you practice on what we covered in the first and fifth and sixth session. In other words, what I saw in reviewing a lot of your responses is that we're not relying enough on frameworks. Many of you went through a lot of detail describing this is why I like a certain option versus another one. And the answers were pretty much all over the place. So I'm going to take us back to the first session where we talked about some critical frameworks, primarily to make sure that you establish the right criteria in evaluating options. So if you remember, we did this for the different acquisition channels, and then we did it for the three different development initiatives. All right, one, I think, is a good start. Almost any time I look at an opportunity, whether it's market expansion, evaluating the feasibility of a new project relative to spending the money elsewhere, going after, let's say, a new group of customers, new targets, they all really come down to the same questions I've seen in many big companies I worked for. We did it at GE, Rockwell, AT&T, and there's different versions of it, but basically they all come down to rationalize the reality of making money. We call it, is it real? Because if you recall, there's that tendency to exaggerate your projections. So people want to see enough evidence to convince them that, hey, you're really onto something, or this is really high risk, just in terms of the reality of the market. We frame that first before we get into, can I win? And if you remember, the emphasis on that can I win were these perceptual maps. And the reason we said that was because the strengths and weaknesses that we normally went through with a SWOT analysis really has to be crafted for certain target segments. Or in some cases, you're doing a mapping based on a well-known criteria that has to be split. For example, like I'm showing you here on the upper right. Now, there was a lot of criteria that we saw in the Compare.com, like the scope of the carriers that are covered in their calculations, the accuracy of the quote, the convenience aspect, speed of the results, buyer journey completion, all that. But at least that's a start saying the customers looking at downloading an app, yours versus another, will at least depend on convenience and aspects of trust or dependability. So that's how we should actually size up whether or not we have a competitive advantage. So I'm going to set the stage for that. Now we could say, all right, now where we looked at our overall advantage, let's bring it down to specifically how would that work for targeted ads, save the quote, early estimations. Okay, the other tool that I want to introduce us to, you probably saw in this case that there's a great deal of emphasis on that purchase funnel again. So we're using this because in our framework for deciding whether or not an opportunity is worthwhile, I really have to know where I am in my funnel objectives. Is this just a matter of gaining attention? Is it building interest, desire, ongoing business, advocacy? So if you don't lay those objectives out, then it's not really clear after you look at your competition, it's not really clear exactly if you're, you're achieving all your different objectives. All right, so I'm going to be introducing these frameworks. Now you see when we're done, now we can say, okay, I favor the app, or I favor the save the quote, or I favor the early estimate. At least we're coming up with some criteria to evaluate all of it. All right, so let's start out with this overall rationalization, or we call it, is it real? Can you win more business in this case? And is it worth it? Now, if you had used this framework, you would probably see the following opportunities you have for demonstrating reality, winnability, and worth. Okay. Under is it real? Another way to look at this is for all those opportunities, can you really validate the marketing acceptance? In other words, will your consumers actually recognize the value and have that result in, a certain amount of bottom line dollars for your company? All right. So how would you actually measure that in this case? Well, we could look at things like evidence of successful usage through the apps, save the quote, estimates, et cetera. And we could also look at related market trends. Now I'm going to drill down to this deeper and give you a lot of examples. So there's probably related market trends dealing with the same concept. In other words, price comparison. So we'll look at like how have travel agencies performed, et cetera. Now, the third thing is, if I'm an executive with a company, I want to know that what you're looking at is really testable. In other words, can I really glean accurate results showing that the project with the test is significantly better than the project that's what we've done traditionally called the control group? Can you really test it? Do you have that kind of data? It comes down to a survey, that's going to be tough. But in this case, we had some actual empirical metrics from web behaviors. So I have data that it's probably a matter of proving that, okay, are you really testing the objectives you laid out, or is this just based on available data? So we'll drill into that. Now, when we get to winning more business, this process really has to start out with what are all your competing alternatives? Now, let's not get too big where we look at, outside the confines of a price comparison app, and we get into, going to websites to pick up a lot of details, one carrier at a time. I would say that's really out of your scope, because the share of the wallet here is how much time will I spend, or how many dollars will I spend to evaluate a broad range of these price quotes. So we'll talk about how we had to really frame that. Who are your real competitors? And I think you'll see 4 different groups. Then we'll go into, all right, winnability, but is it really consistent with the customer motives? And this is where I'm going to drill down to the purchase funnel to get a better idea of whether or not it's consistent. Then we can develop the framework for these, what we call these perceptual maps. In other words, do you see the fit of your offering with what the customers value. So we'll look at if they're really valuing dependability or reliability, or are they really valuing sort of the efficiency side, rapid quotes, simplicity, things like that. So we want to rate our competition along each one of those dimensions, much like what we did in the bed and breakfast example in our first class. So now this will kind of lay the groundwork for whether or not there's a potential for, now I emphasize, a noticeable value advantage. All right. So at this point, we know that maybe we have an opportunity to compete. We know that we're really onto something in terms of a growing market of opportunity. Now, I really want to look at it from the standpoint of, does it make sense? So we'll look at, in some cases you saw where there was this upside potential. In other words, with that initiative, we'll get a lot more data. We'll get a lot more users. We could cross-sell more, all kinds of things, right? But there clearly was, across those three options, different levels of investment risk. Okay, and there's also some undesirables. These are not the customers we want to get. Or there's some things we're doing here that could affect our long-term image or confuse our customers in terms of our mark of distinction. So let's take these kind of one at a time. I'm also going to come up with or expose this chart that says, don't get carried away with the numbers. I see that with a lot of the assignment responses. Not every case in a company requires a lot of analytics. Now, we've learned all the analytic methods throughout this course, but there might be some cases where it's very qualitative. In this case, you have both. But the bottom line is, it's probably more emphasis placed on setting up these frameworks. Is it real? Can you win? Is it worth it? Does it meet needs, et cetera? So I would go back to that chart where we said, don't get carried away on your numbers because you're dealing with projections. All right. So advanced statistics is not really required here. You'll see a little bit more of the statistics when we get to rocket fuel, but not necessarily in this case. All right, so let's start out with answering this question. Is it real, as a background for the first question? In other words, we're looking at this opportunity to lift completion rates. As you remember, from this case, that was a significant problem they had. The response rate was really dropping, right? So we're looking at one of those three options. So in answering the question, is it real? I probably want to start with, give some evidence of successful usage. So if you did a web search, you'd probably see that, these mobile apps are pretty common. Now, not necessarily at the time this case was done, but today it clearly is. Also, you'll see down here, there is a lot of applications for the save the quote. So some of you felt that this was a viable option. Others said you were really opposed to it because of the intrusion it has in email. It will contribute to email spam, et cetera. But you do have an awful lot of people doing that. Now they append it with things like, you're 78% complete. So do you want to really save it, or do you want to finish off? So there's some ways that maybe we could improve, some remedies we have to improve that option. Okay. Even State Farm, if you see here, periodically they put in here, save and continue later. You can save your quote at any point during the process and then come back to it later. So it's fairly common in the car insurance business. The other thing that's becoming very common, you have a lot of these just estimates, quote estimates. One's called like Nerd Wallet, one is called Gaby. I'll talk about this a little bit further. So bottom line here is, there is evidence of successful usage of going the route of a mobile app, saving a quote, or providing an early estimate. Now, next thing I want some kind of comfort or confidence that this overall market is growing. In other words, why waste your time trying to figure out if, there are competitors or signs of usability for a feature if you're dealing with a dying market? So in this case, a lot of times we look at total market, available market, addressed market, et cetera. Let's just look at the total market to kind of set the stage. Expedia.com and Trivago and a lot of places that are not only booking services, but helping you get the best price on certain products. You can evaluate the viability of that concept. In other words, are consumers increasingly depending on whether it's an app or some kind of software to do these price comparisons using the web? All right, well, take a look at, here's a couple charts here. One, I said, well, let's just look at the revenue growth for Expedia.com and a few of the other contenders in that business. Same concept. You're basically starting out with just shopping for the best quote on anything from airlines, hotels, rental cars, etc. But you're leading it all the way to closure. Now, as you can link to this airline Delta, and they'll complete the rest. So it's a similar concept. So let's find out if the concept is growing. Well, these charts down here says, yeah, it appears that people are getting more comfortable with this and more dependent on it. All right, now the next part is experiment testability. Do we really have an avenue here to say, okay, I have a control group that I can measure relative to some improvement? In this case, we were focusing on the early estimate. Maybe I compare the two and I could determine if this new feature is really going to improve the lift in conversion or in form filling completion. So I'm going to take you to an experiment that I went through a number of years ago to give you an idea of how you determine testability. And the emphasis, as you guys saw in the rocket fuel case, is really looking at all the factors to set up the experiment in order to make sure that I'm controlling the environment for a lot of extraneous variables. Like we saw in one case, okay, there's too much variation in the population, too many age groups, whatever. But a lot of times it could be there's too many dynamics happening in the marketplace across your control and your test group, where it's really hard for you to figure out, was this change in lift really due to this new estimate feature, right? And then the other part relates to, are there really metrics for success? Well, in the digital arena, there normally is. You have views, likes, actions taken by the user in terms of filling information, how long they were on a page. So we have an awful lot of metrics here for pulling it off. Now let's just start with what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Excuse me. What are you really trying to accomplish in this test? Now you saw that most of them come down to either I'm trying to nullify a hypothesis. In other words, does this content boost skill endorsements? I'll start out by saying it doesn't, and then I'll test for the null of that hypothesis. Oftentimes, that's a first step. But in a lot of cases, it's comparing different options. All right, the goal that we had with this one lawyer, he used to be he was a former president of the Florida Bar Association, very popular, influential in the legal community, especially like personal injury, wrongful death, things of that sort. But he wasn't getting any traction at all on LinkedIn. So we start out with, is there a measure to determine if what you want to do for him through LinkedIn? Yes, it's called skill endorsements. That is the measure. Think of it as that's your dependent variable. Can we measure it? Absolutely. There's an actual count. of the amount of people that are endorsing it. So that was his struggle. Now, we knew that would be a dependent variable, but here is where all these extraneous variables come in that have to be controlled. Many things are going on at the same time and driving these endorsements, connecting with people, recommendations that are coming in, new postings, activity in groups, prestigious awards that people are, complimenting you on. All these things could have an impact on your endorsements. So like this chart in the right here, we said, let's control for all these possibilities: activity in groups, reaching out to others, answering connections, recommendations, all that stuff. Okay. And keep it constant for as long of a period as is feasible. So you saw, for example, in a rocket fuel, I think they had a 3-month period. Longer than that, you saw the problem with opportunity costs, right? You remember the opportunity costs, it's like, okay, during this time that you're performing this test, you're losing business. Your control group is not being subjected to, in this case, it would be people asking for invites, activity in the discussion groups, and things like that, or posting. Right? So I want to control it for all of this. And I want to see to what degree Eugene's endorsements are impacted by content, because the thing we noticed was he wasn't posting any content. Okay, so we know what those extraneous variables are, and that we're controlling for it. We have metrics, just number of endorsements. And we think we could set up a control group that's executable in the right time frame without harming existing invites. Okay, much like the control group we had in one of our cases, they're not being exposed to an ad that could be very helpful in getting business. In this case, we're saying we got a control group where we're going to refrain from any gesture or connection building with all of our new connections. And with all the people expecting me to contribute in the group, we're going to put a hold on all that. So then I could isolate this test on content effectiveness. All right, so here's what happened in the test. So we first had to have a time frame. We did a 4-month test. Now, we did this back in July of 2015, starting in March, and then we finished it in July. Longer than that, we felt, we're going to really hurt his relationship building. Shorter than that, there's probably not enough data to collect. But it starts with this. So the average number of endorsements for the top 160 lawyers in the Tri-County area, in the personal injury area, was about 677. At the time that we started his control experiment, Eugene only had 340. Then we posted 3 types of content where we looked at instructional content and insightful content, which our studies show should have the most impact on getting endorsements, as opposed to, bragging about a case you won, and et cetera. So we knew that was an effective way for getting endorsements. And now we wanted to determine to what degree is it effective. Well, in that 4-month test, he didn't get to the average, but he went up significantly from 340 endorsements to 517. So now he could go back and, turn on the spigot and know that the content will give him a substantial amount of lift. All right. So it's kind of what we're doing early on in this process. So we're looking at that testability. Then let's kind of conclude what you should get from that. So evidence of successful usage. We had some market trend studies that we could claim are good proxies or correlations for the business we're looking at. So we're on to something long-term is kind of what it's saying. And you just saw how we could control the necessary extraneous variables. Hopefully we can do that in this case coming up. And we have things like empirical data. So it's not just conjecture from attitude surveys, et cetera. I have very scalable testing. So, it's not like I have to wait a year to get started. I could do it over a 2-month period, 6-month period, depending upon the level of significance I wanted in my results. All right. So it seems to do well in terms of experiment testability and are likely to do well in experiment testability for this car insurance case. And then we saw the evidence of successful usage, save the quotes, the mobile apps, and the estimates. So at this point, this should score fairly high in terms of, is the concept real? Now let's look at winning. And this is where a lot of difficulty comes in. Perceptual maps are critical to this part, or we get off into a tangent of many words with all kinds of criteria. This way, that you have sort of like an apples to apples comparison of all the relevant competition along consistent dimensions. All right. Now, at the same time, you have to kind of look at what was the overall landscape. Well, the way I see the landscape here, and some literature even pointed this out, there are a number of people that are really just what I call lead generators. They find the best match for you. They send it out to a particular carrier like State Farm, and then State Farm will carry the ball from that point forward if the person really wants a quote. Meanwhile, at least they saw possibilities of quote ranges. You saw some of these that said, okay, not getting your driving record, credit report, kind of vehicle and all that. Just know in general that for Florida, here is a range of all these different rates. Okay, so they are at least providing that value, enough incentive for you to say, all right, I want to click further because you have told me that these are the viable options I have for car insurance. Now, how they get paid? They get paid primarily by that carrier that's ultimately selected. They get paid basically a referral fee. Okay, so we also want to evaluate this potential for noticeable value advantage, which I hope you recalled from the bed and breakfast example, where we were saying, look, these customers are looking for relaxation and solitude. We think their criteria will be to what degree do they have historical charm, natural settings, therapeutic comfort, and a few more criteria. But we said that's what would be important to this segment of users. In this case, segment of shoppers using digital tools to find the best rates. Okay, and then from there, we should look at what is the fit for each one of these 4 groups: quote estimators, real-time quote estimators, and insurance comparison platforms. Let's put them in groups so we don't have to look at, there's a myriad of about 25 different competitors. All right. So in addition to the lead generators, we looked at the quote estimators. So these are the people currently doing estimates, but basically what they're doing is they're just giving you a calculator and they're saying, based on the information you gave me, without getting into a whole lot of detail, it looks like, this is the range of companies that you should be looking at and the price they would give you, just on some broad information you gave me up front. Driving record, credit scores, things along those lines. Now, from there, from those estimators, then we get into the real-time real quotes. I'm giving you something that you could go to the bank on, and you don't have to wait 3 days for me to give you the evidence. All right. So basically, at most, like a half an hour after your quote request, you will get all the necessary information. So that's a distinct group: real-time real quotes. Then you have the 4th group, Progressive Insurance and all these saying, well, you know what, we'll give you a comparison. So when you look at our bid, we'll show you, here's what you would pay with all these other companies. All right. So those are the four groups I would argue we should bring into a perceptual map along this criteria. Okay, so let's dive into this a little deeper. We know from a lot of the data in the case that distinctions are made across these different options. You know, companies like Zebra was mentioned, and Surify, a whole host of these solutions. They seem to first look at dependability and then they look at convenience. Now, there's a lot of different ways of measuring something like convenience, but this would be a good enough start. Now, remember the ruler example I gave you. Don't overdo this process, okay? But showing in a perceptual map is going to give you a better idea of where you stand rather than just trying to line up your competition on best quality, best price. All right. So if it's convenience, you could argue that speed of results is very important. And that would include things like, the speed of the quote, questionnaire completion, the simplicity. They went to buttons before it was filling in information. You saw some quotes as fast as 45 minutes. I think there was Zebra. And then the comparative rate response time. Some will say, I'll get back to you, give me your email, and then bing, 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 a notice will come up, or you'll get a notification on your mobile phone that we have those three particular apps. So all those kind of relate to, let's call it like the speed of your overall results. But then there's also the convenience of the buyer journey competition. So I would weigh all these different competitive options along the lines of, one-stop shop at one end and early preliminary quote only at the other one. In other words, you're providing more convenience by doing everything for that person inquiring about a quote. So imagine if you go with these general price comparison apps, that's like Shop Savvy, QR Reader. Now, at minimum, you're going to one more site, if not another site. Each one's going to ask you for duplicate information, etc. And then moreover, there's the lapse in time. Let's say this price comparison app, like the brokers we talked about, the broker words will give you some preliminary information. Then they'll take you to compare.com, who ultimately takes you to an insurance carrier. So all that kind of relates to the convenience of the buyer journey completion. Can you do it seamlessly? All the more you can do that, cradle to grave, the more your solution should have a potential value advantage. Now, the other thing I would put in here is this whole role of dependability. Clearly, we saw the quote accuracy. All right. And if you did some web searching, you probably find that it's not a matter of guarantee in a bank versus estimate. Now, a lot of these apps give you a percent accuracy. One will say 95% confident, for example. Okay. So we know quote accuracy is really important. Clearly, this is where the platforms have, Progressive's not going to give you an inaccurate rate on their own account, but I won't put them too far to the right because we don't know how accurate their competing estimates are. Okay. But then the last thing is the scope of the carrier comparisons. So it's not going to be all that dependable if you've left out major competitors. So when I looked into some of these apps, I found, okay, I always get MetLife, maybe Geico. There's some others that give me like 6 or 7 carriers, much like Expedia.com will say, okay, for this flight you're taking, here's 5 different airlines, if not more. So that scope of carrier competition or comparisons, the ones that are kind of partnering with you should kind of contribute to this overall dependability. In other words, I can be assured that you covered all the ground of making these comparisons. You've covered all the players. Okay. All right. So from this perceptual map, now at least I could visually say there's an opportunity here for compare.com to improve. Now, it won't necessarily, your goal is to be at the upper right, but along the lines of dependability, they're already well positioned in terms of scope and quote accuracy. Now, there's things I could do, obviously, to improve quote accuracy, probably under the save the quote, because if you're willing to wait a little longer, they're going to ask you more information, probably along the lines of your driving record. I'll get into some of this detail later, but an example could be, I'm going to give you a scanning capability where you can scan your driver's license and send me a PDF on your credit score and your current policy. And so there's a lot of things like that that we can do that can improve the dependability as well as the convenience. In other words, it's going to lead to more accuracy in our quote without really harming the overall efficiency, because I'm going to count on all these electronic PDF file transfers, et cetera. Okay. Also, there's continuing work they could do on the scope of carrier comparisons. You saw, for example, like with their TV ads, a big advantage of that is that you're bringing more carriers on board. So there's no reason to believe they won't continue doing that. Now, when it comes to speed of results and the buyer journey compilation, it's arguable that they can only get so high in terms of the compilation, I'm sorry, the buyer journey completion. It's only so far they can go. The carriers are probably taking you even further in terms of not only have we completed a contract for you, but we've started to introduce some customer service options, et cetera. So I wouldn't exaggerate that one, but speed of results definitely could go up. And this is where the estimates would help. Maybe the save per quote, possibly an app. So there's room for them to go to the right. Now, so the bottom line is, when you measure the relevant competition along the relevant attributes, convenience, dependability, okay, Compare.com has an avenue to improve their reach and competitive performance, potentially from 1 to 3 of these new initiatives. We're going to do that when this is done. That's where we're going to say, all right, let's take each one of these options one at a time. But that's the role of perceptual maps in terms of answering that question, can you win? If you notice the steps we went through, we had to figure out who are the relevant competitors. Do you see a noticeable value advantage? In other words, if you're kind of huddled here in the midst of everybody else, nobody's going to really notice the advantage. Now, we're going to talk a little later when I get to the purchase funnel, how this is consistent with the customer motives. We'll take it one stage of the funnel at a time. And you're seeing it's got a strategic fit with what's important, the dependability and convenience fit. And that's basically how we looked at can we win? Bottom line you would have from that perceptual map is, from what we see so far, yes, there's an opportunity to compete. Now, this is where your analysis gets a little bit more extensive. So on every type of opportunity, we should always be looking at, is it worth it? Now, oftentimes that is it worth it is related to risk reward, oftentimes translate to feasibility. All right. So the two are slightly different, but let's look at both of them. For example, I look at the graph here to the right. We're saying, suppose I have risks on the left of the scale and rewards at the top of it. Okay. All right. I'm doing kind of a balancing act from a lot of intangibles with subjective measurements. But this process is better than saying, I just have too many cons, not enough pros, right? But it comes down to, what do you think you can really measure? So let's start out with the rewards, the upside potential. We saw with a couple of those initiatives that you'll get additional customer insights, more data, okay? Some had a different impact on expanded awareness. So not only are you helping out with this improved completion rate, but the process you're using to do that is going to give you exposure to a broader range of target audience? And are there cross-selling opportunities? Okay. And can you offer new carrier partnerships? Some might be more enticing to the carrier saying, all right, I got to get a chunk of this business. Okay, investment risk. There were some very significant ones, the investment return, uncertainty. They were doing this when, apps really didn't have enough data to validate their marketability. Okay. And we saw in some of these cases, I saw you guys answer this on your group case, some have hidden marketing costs versus others like Save the Quote. You don't really have to do any marketing to let people know that you have that feature. Okay. Now, you remember we talked about the undesirables. Well, there were some of these people are just browsing, where they have no immediate need for insurance alternatives. We saw that from the results of dealing with brokers. These are people just saying, I want to see if I can save on insurance, not shopping around for the alternative yet. Okay. Then we had to look at, as another risk, is there the risk that you could confuse the image that you're trying to portray or create some kind of inconsistency? So we definitely saw that with looking at the gaps between an estimate and a final quote. If you start moving too much into the estimate where you're known to be the one with the definitive quote, that could really tarnish your image. Also, there was a concern somebody just registered about, the perception of being in the inbox, another case of spamming. Now, I found myself just exploring all these different apps. They're all calling me now. And I have to tell them that this was just information for a class exercise. Then they hit me with the emails. So that's a fear I think we all have. So we've got to be careful that with some of these options, you could be ruining your image in terms of an expectation, like in the case of final quotes, or you could be hurting your image by going these spam routes or what's perceived to be spam. All right, so let's kind of quickly sum this up and do it to where now I could translate that. Is it real? Is it winnable? And is it worth it? Into a framework for doing that across our three options: mobile app, estimate from less information, and save my quote. Now I'm going to show you this in the next chart, blowing it up. But at this point, I just want to kind of explain how the process works. Well, if you recall, the is it real here, we said was more about market acceptance validation. We see the need to examine this in terms of customer motive. Is it consistent with each one of those stages: awareness, interest, desire, pull out your wallet, and the concept trend? In other words, is there some evidence with each one of these options here to tell us whether this is really consistent with what's happening in the marketplace, maybe from related businesses? Is it winnable? That's clear. There's a way to measure value advantage in each one of these cases. So we'll talk about how we could show the consistency of compare with the customer motives. And you saw one of the questions was related to that, like the alignment of the selling process to basically the buyer journey or buyer funnel, and the alignment of the acquisition channels with that funnel. Okay. So we'll also look at, is it winnable in terms of, well, how do each one of these options measure up along convenience? Well, we definitely can measure things like the minimal effort required, which would be a convenience factor, getting quicker results, something along those lines. And we think it could be winnable in terms of that trust and dependability. Okay, in other words, there's, or at least a consideration will be made for that competitive criteria, like the gaps between what I expected to be final and an early estimate, email intrusion, perceived opportunism in the email. So these are different things that we'll be weighing. And it looks like, we have an opportunity to avoid one that would be to save the quote going into your inbox, and maybe to mitigate the other. An early estimate, maybe with someone just talked about like a meter that says 95% confident, 99% confident. You know, there's different ways that we think we could make it winnable. Now, is it worth it? I would break that up into two parts. One, I would start with the upside potential. So we know we can get the additional customer insights and the opportunity for expanded awareness, and the rest would be more the those financial risks. You know, the uncertain marketability of a map that's going to, you know, require a great deal of fixed cost and IT and some other development costs. All right, so this is what we're then going to use: market acceptance, value advantage, upside potential, and risk to evaluate all three of these opportunities: mobile app, estimates, save the quote. And we're going to evaluate them looking at the pros and cons. And also, as some of you pointed out, well, here's an opportunity to address the shortcomings. I was glad you guys brought that up, because in every one of these analyses, you want to say, however, if we did something, it's a remedy that can boost what appears to be a shortcoming to maybe even what turns out to be a benefit. Now, this next part is where I'm saying, go back to the ruler rule, okay? Don't overdo the weighting, influence, and the rating, all right? You have to do some of it, though, subjectively. Like, as I was reading a lot of your responses, you know, some of you just kind of said, I don't think this is going to happen. Okay, that I think really should be shown in this overall chart, this framework for rationalizing opportunities, where you have some idea of preference for one option versus the other along things like market validation, giving you a value advantage, upside potential. In other words, showing something is better than avoiding it, where you're not really making a decision. Okay. So here is how I believe it should look. By the way, we did expand on this a little bit more, where it says, is it worth it? Besides the investment return and certainty, we thought, okay, let's look at, you know, that risk of hidden marketing costs in order to promote this new functionality. That's definitely going to be a case with the mobile app, and sometimes a resource drain. In other words, it might not be a whole lot of synergy. The app certainly would be, if you remember how they set up these business units, the app should apply to all those groups, right? The save the quote, maybe not. The estimate, possibly. So, you know, at least it's a consideration saying it's not going to be worth it if this is siloed. In other words, we're going to spend $1 million on something that just benefits one department. All right. So I'll leave this with you guys. This is how I would do the overall evaluation then. So, you know, I looked at like the mobile apps. Well, some of the pros here were market validation related, and then there was room for competition. It definitely suited the trend, as most of you guys pointed out. It's well suited to future cross-selling, so there's some upside here, right? And it creates sort of like this stickiness. So in other words, you're going to be around longer. If you remember from an earlier exercise, I want to be everywhere all the time. Okay. I think only the app really gives you that advantage. Now, we also saw where it represents more commitment to the brand. For example, if you're an app and somebody downloads it, you have an opportunity to be the indispensable resource. People aren't going to download Zebra, InsuranceFi, NerdWallet, Gabby. They're only going to download one, as this is my indispensable resource. So you have an opportunity to really give more commitment to the brand because you're the only name they associate with providing price comparisons. All right. There's some drawbacks here, though. This is one where, you know, the worth it would not rate so high. It's got high fixed costs for uncertain returns. The other thing is that you're competing with the app stores. It's a lot of effort and motivation for potentially just a one-time use, as someone just pointed out. There's over 3 million apps now worldwide. So just getting people's attention that you exist, that's going to be a major challenge. Also, you can't rule out everybody. I read in a lot of your responses that this is where everybody's going. Not necessarily. Okay, it caters to those that are very proficient with app usage. There could be some older groups where it doesn't fly for them. So it can't be your only alternative. And as we talked about, very high marketing cost for awareness. Advertising an app is not the same as advertising a feature. Sometimes advertising a feature could be on your traditional site. New feature with a star on it is all you have to do. Apps, you're going to have to really go to some mass media, broad awareness advertising, or really depend heavily on social media. All right, let's take a look at, is there a remedy? Okay. One is that you could offer a discount or some kind of incentive just to get people motivated to download the app. So if you're doing this through social media, that's one option. Okay. Or make it free. All right. If we look at that, getting that early estimate, in other words, I'm going to release a preliminary estimate in advance of your final quote, in case, you don't have the time to put together a whole spreadsheet of comparative price quotes. Okay, some of the benefits there, so you get that early confidence of meeting expectations from a lengthy process, because as I found out, it's like, now I'm getting into all this, the personal information, car information, policy information, and at the end, what if I come up empty? It's the same old policy I always had. All right, so that early confidence could be the big plus for that estimate. And there's little, if any, additional marketing effort. Just go ahead and put it on your site. These control tests are going to show you that. So if you want, here's the widget at the top right here. Just click on it. We'll give you that early estimate. But we did talk about the big problem here would be the tarnished image. When the estimate of final gap is just too big, like I was thinking $400 some dollars, turns out to be 700 by the time I finish. That could hurt your overall image, obviously. All right, so I like the idea of one of the groups here, and I saw a little bit of this done with today's apps. This is an excellent example. So you just provide a meter for refining the quote range as they give you more information. So we saw the one where, okay, if you're 95% confident, or if you can live with 95% confidence, here's the rate. And maybe it was only 50% confident before. But another way you can do that is, based on all the information you gave me, this is the rate. So I'll basically give you updates in rates, not confidence level. I think that's what the students were suggesting. That could be a cool offering. Or I know that, and if you told me the completion rate as well, like I'm 90% there, starting to look like I got 3 options here. Okay, now I'll go dig up all my driver information, car information, credit information, etc. All right, so there's a way you can really shore up the drawbacks or perceived drawbacks of that early estimate. Save my quote. Many of you have picked that one. Obviously, its benefit is it's a very safe way to maintain trust without the risk of inaccuracy. In other words, you're forcing them to wait for the final quote. You're not advancing it with an estimate. And it's also going to expand the audience to those that just don't have the convenience. Like when I was going through a lot of stuff, it's like, okay, I'll spend 10 minutes, but not now. So I don't want to go through it all over again. If I start spending more than 4 minutes, I would bail out. Okay. Its drawbacks is, we all talked about this in our response, you have that email sharing reluctance, spam reputation, okay. Some even privacy concerns. I'm giving you a lot of my account profile information. We talked about that ID. Maybe there's just an ID I can go back to. Yeah, but you're still providing a lot of information you're not comfortable with releasing. There's limited real-time data collection. Okay. And there's also this potentially lost window of opportunity. In other words, you're going to have to go back in there and remind people, because how many of us really say, oh, I have to remember to finish that quote I started last Tuesday. It's been archived by now. Very few of us would do that. So now you're going to have to go in there with reminders like, don't forget, you're 75% complete with this, in case you forgot the email you got 2 or 3 days ago. So I think that could be a major hurdle. Now, I agree with a lot of you that this quote ID could be the way to reactivate it. In other words, just wait for this person rather than being reminded out of an email. Wait for them to go back and realize that, okay, I was near done. It's like us finishing a webinar. I'll finish it later, but I don't have to give you a whole lot of information up front. It's already been saved for me. So I can dive right into my third step, personal information. So I think as a result, you have a pretty viable remedy there. Now, from all that, then let's take it to an evaluation across, is it real, can you win, is it worth it, we translate it into, in this case, market acceptance, value advantage, and then the is it worth it is split between the risk side and the upside potential. And this is what I'm saying, I would just get into subjective evaluations. I found that doing a lot of strategic plans, this is good enough. Some feel that, oh, they're going to say, what are the actual ranges of, okay, when I was at GE, we were bidding on billion-dollar defense programs, you had to show the probability of funding, probability of winning, and then you showed the criteria like, what gives me a probability from 89? Okay, big contracts, fine, but this is just an investment, a software investment, right? So going through this, I could say, and it helps you communicate now. So somebody can say, well, I really like the app. It had a really high risk. Okay, but it's also got high upside potential. And from our evaluation above, and the framework, is it real, can you win, and is it worth it? It's got moderate market acceptance. And from this analysis, I'd say it gives us a moderate value advantage. Okay, none of them you can really highlight as showing very high advantage. But I do have one like this estimate, the early estimate. You can rate this as being very high in terms of market acceptance based on the criteria we had. But there wasn't really any upside potential. There's not going to give you broader awareness or necessarily allow you to collect information. And it's got a moderate risk, okay? Contrary to the IT investment that went into the app development. Now, the third one about save the quote, the market acceptance there, I would say it would be like low to moderate. There's already this bad impression of it. Upside potential is no upside potential. It doesn't really branch off into, new features. Like the app, you could say, okay, once you're here, now we can give you service tips, etc. The risk in the case of that save the quote is probably just moderate. All right. It looks like it's a very scalable type investment. Okay, so now let's answer this question too. Know what we know so far from the prior question. In other words, let's decide if all these opportunities will allow Compare to accomplish their goals one stage of the funnel at a time. So you remember in Compare.com, they gave you, there's this called ADA, attention, interest, desire, and I think the last one was action or something along those lines. Okay. Most of you that have taken like my digital marketing or my social media marketing course, we tend to use things like exposure, discovery, consideration, and action. Seems to resonate very well with a buyer journey in the digital world. Okay, so in doing this evaluation, this is where I think you have to show this in some kind of funnel. It's really hard to say, is this selling process align well with the buying process? without looking at what are you trying to accomplish and what do you contribute compare at each stage of the funnel. All right, now that should lead to a gap analysis. So we're going to answer both of these questions. Remember, one is the alignment with the acquisition channels, or the acquisition alignment with the buying process, and the overall selling process with the buying process. So let's take this starting with exposure. Okay, so the selling process that it seems Compare.com wants to follow is awareness of savings possibilities to start their browse. Now you saw that on a couple of their ads, their TV ads. So they're at a good point of exposure. In other words, you want to go in there and say, hey, look at the rates you can get. You know, if you fit this formula, et cetera. You want to start out by saying, you know, there's savings possibilities that could only come from a non-affiliated player, neutral party. Some people call them honest brokers. How would you like to know if you can just save? Okay, and in effect, you're starting a browse. So they don't even really know about you yet. They haven't discovered you. They're just have been exposed to the fact that there are ways to do a comparison shop along some set criteria. Okay. The other thing in their selling process we talked about, you know, they did a lot of mass communication that was built, if you look at the background of it, primarily along demographics. So they would buy gross rating points, we call it, things like that, with maybe prime TV slots during the day throughout Florida, you know, but it was all really driven by demographics. Now, the channels in this case, this is where you had the brokers provide a lot. So remember, just at the exposure saying, hey, do you know that you can save? And there's ways that you can evaluate this. Okay. And it worked on these search terms for browsing, cheap insurance, et cetera, where then these brokers would basically take that browse and send it to the people that do the detailed comparisons, like Zebra, Compare.com, or it might just go right directly to the carrier. Let me give you kind of an example. You guys could just click on here to see how that works. So if you were to type in cheap car insurance in Florida, this is where it sends you. So at this point, you're still pretty much at that exposure stage, right? But this is the value of having the brokers give referrals to Compare.com, because they get a preliminary view saying, in general, like in Florida, who are the insurers and what's the average quote? Now, I know those aren't necessarily final because you haven't asked me a whole lot about my driving record, the car I'm insuring, all the coverage I want, et cetera. But at least that lets me know that there's a possibility of savings here. You know, if I'm using Travelers, you know, maybe the savings through Geico or USAA, right? So that's basically the kind of information that you'll get from that broker that provides the exposure to there's a possibility for savings you may not have been aware of. Sorry here, everybody. I lost my PowerPoint again. Just 1 second, please. I can't find it. Ah, here you are. Okay, there's a couple others that you can click on that show you that channel might really work well for them in terms of it's only trying to give you a preliminary estimate to give you exposure to the fact that there are tools out there that can help you determine your savings. Now, here's what one of you has pointed out, which I fully agreed with, the gap analysis. So you could say that the selling process is pretty much what we call top funnel or top of mind. I'm sorry, not top funnel, but top of mind. In other words, I'll keep slamming you with all these TV ads, the different ways that you can reach your demographic audience. and talk about, that savings are possible. All right. But you're missing out on two things. One, we saw from the case that you have to have another avenue that allows people to use your brand name when they do their search, because you'll never show up under cheap insurance in Florida. There's so many of carriers, let alone comparative type tools. But I want to do it in such a way where people will type in, compare.com, cheap insurance. Okay. Now, what you will find is you'll still get compare cheap insurance, and it's done by InsuranceFi and Zebra and all, but at least you have an opportunity to bump up. Now, what does that mean? I've got to have campaigns that actually give me brand awareness. So I would say it's a gap in terms of you're not taking advantage of your keywords that would give you the greatest amount of attention on the search engine results page. In other words, that you'll be prioritized. You have a URL domain site called compare.com. That term compare should probably work, but they obviously aren't working with a lot of compare related terms. Okay. And they're certainly not working with compare.com that much if you just look at the number of search results. So I thought that's one thing they have to work on, is their search engine campaign in order to highlight their brand and give them that long-tailed 4 words distinction from the heavy competition in a car insurance comparison. But I think the biggest thing they're missing is the social media influence. It's perfect for social media. One, you get the hyper targeting. So now I could put content, even things like Instagram stories, in front of somebody that I know would be interested based on their browsing patterns, based on some of the content they posted, maybe even on the information in their profile. And I can say, I want good driving record, middle-aged, new driver, et cetera, and really hyper target my content. Now, furthermore, I would argue this is a great way to build a relationship. Compare.com doesn't have to keep hitting you with these ads. They should be providing you tips and criteria. There's a lot of blogs on this topic. What should I look for in insurance? What is some of the criteria and weighing the different options? Here's a rating I did of all the insurance carriers. And so I would constantly be feeding that kind of content on Instagram, Facebook. I don't know if you have TikTok in this case, but anyways, there's at least 2 that would be very suitable for it. Okay, and then I could use it for, moving into something like, Instagram stories, where we do a fun thing about, similar to what you saw in some of their commercials, or maybe some kind of trivia question, kind of like what you see in a driver's test. Like, did you know, or how many do you think, or fill in the blanks. And then from there, you could kind of take them through, a series of funneling exercises like, hey, how would you like to see, based on this quiz you did for me, where you would rate in terms of a driver's record. And from there, you can go to insurance options. So there's a way to court your customers from, let me help you with your overall problems, to, you can come to my app and I could kind of help you all the way through buying your new insurance. Okay, let's go to the next one. So discovery means this is where I need that brand recognition for search. That's kind of what they're trying to do, I would argue, with a lot of their mass communication ads. And also, they've got an ability to take organic traffic links to their website. So if you look at some of the Google Analytics associated with their site, it will show you that they are capturing a lot of the terms in their site. I think where they need a lot of work is the paid search campaigns to get them to the site. But they're at least that's their approach. trying to get their name recognition out there and get traffic going to their actual site is how they'll be discovered. Now, the way they're trying to do that besides the brokers are those TV ads. Now notice what they do in the TV ads. I'll click on one of them here. You not only get name recognition, but it is helping you a little bit with the top of the funnel, telling you that, did you know how much you can save on car insurance? Let's take a look at this. I'll first make sure my sound is on. Oh. Okay, hold on 1 second. I've got to make sure the sound is on this. Okay.
Beam him in, Trudy.
What the? Where am I?
You're among friends. We beamed in this average citizen to demonstrate an amazing technology.
I'll leave it with you
Compare.com,
guys.
where you can compare up to
I
50
gotta
car
turn the
insurance
sound,
rates and
but
find the
anyway, I'll just
lowest.
kind of go through. real
I
quick
pay
for
way
you.
more than that.
And
So they
fix
highlight both
it.
the brand name as
And
well
just
as,
like that, you're saving money.
you know, the major
Send him home,
needs they're
Trudy.
addressing. You know, how do I find out that you
Oops.
get insurance without spending money?
Compare.com. For saving on car insurance, nothing else compares.
Close that up. All right, now the next part that we're getting into is the consideration, that interest and desire. All right, so what could really contribute to that? I would start with credibility. Now it's okay, I'll consider you because I know a little bit about you. And if you notice a couple things they have at their disposal, one of them they talked about, another one they didn't. But there's carrier support. In other words, I will consider your offer if you show like 4 or 5 quotes from different carriers. That's one way of doing it. But also now most of them have reviews. Now I believe this just really developed over the last few years, so it's post case completion. But you should get all these different star reviews. Now, if you go to the site over here, you click, I don't want to click on it, but I would advise you to click on it. Sometimes you'll get a consideration if you just show, here are the major players. And we talked about this a little earlier. Here are 6, and I have these strictly for Delray Beach. These are the average rate comparisons, and I'll restrict it to good driving record, low and average rates only. So that's something I think they're doing really well to get people to consider it. It's like, okay, you give me a reason to look at you. You seem pretty credible. All right. Now, another one I would call, you're the honest broker. So I think that's a great thing they're doing in their selling process. By virtue of being non-affiliated with any carrier, you should get a more honest or objective answer. Now, if we take a look at that consideration and how it's being handled by your acquisition channels, here's where the AdWords come in, okay? So click on here and you'll see, for example, like when you type in something related to your brand name. Remember, the AdWords only became effective when the brand name was in there. I would look at things like the overall search volume. Let me try to click on this so you get a good picture of it. So at least they're attempting to use these AdWords to get people to notice them. And you'll see they show up very high in the list when you type in compare.com. But you'll see some other apps show up. Now, this is a pretty good search result page, right? But let's say if I said compare, so I'm taking advantage of the compare term, car insurance rates. And now I see ones from Geico. And then even if you get further down here into the organic results, you have Nerd Wallet. There's going to be competition. The Zebra, Quote Wizard, US News, Market Watch. All right. So it's probably saying that, look, you've got a brand that's called compare.com, but you're not capitalizing on compare. So what does that really mean? You know, this is where I believe they have to look at a lot of their like TV campaigns, and this is where social media would help. Maybe you have a hashtag that's called compare, because that will affect your search engine results as well. So overall, you know, I would give them, you know, some credit for the fact that that's the route to take. In other words, you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of that compare term, because these search engines, when the spiders that kind of crawl through your site and say, oh, compare.com, that matches well with compare. The problem is they're not taking advantage of compare in their keyword phrases as well as they could, because if it was as well as they could, they would be in that top page along with Surify, Zebra, and the rest of them. All right, let me kind of wrap this up and we'll get into the next exercise. All right, now, when you think about where we are in that gap analysis, we talked a little bit about social media. The one thing I think is missing from their TV ads and the broker business, et cetera, is again, a social media, but not necessarily just for relationship building and getting awareness with blog tips and that sort of thing. But this relates to kind of what we talked about with the eyes of the journey. So they have these pages built where you should be looking at things like who's been introduced, who's interested, who's invested, who's investigated, you know, et cetera. Those eyes of the journey we talked about, because now Facebook Pixels and the Google Tag Manager could improve your discovery process as more ads go out to prospective users of this app. So let's take a look at that. All right, this is how I would look at the overall tag manager. I want to make sure that you guys can see this. Okay. So if you remember from Chris Mercer's film, so we talked about it, you know, if you could set up your website to pick up all these behaviors, then a combination of Google Tag Manager and Facebook's Pixels could give you a lot of useful information to help in your discovery. So you could, for example, you know, ask how many people bounce from the page. I can get that kind of information, and I probably do it through a tag on page view. Okay, then I'll look at measures of interest. I'll serve them up another ad that maybe lets them know, okay, this is more about the discovery process. Did you know you could save? Did you know that there's a way to compare along some uniform criteria? And I'll base that on how long they stayed. And then the introduced, I'll tag that from how much of the form that they filled out. These people got all the way to personal information. Give them ad 4 if they bail out. And then they'll at least see that, by the way, we cover up to 50 different carriers, et cetera. All right, same with, you know, they filled the form out all the way through the personalized quote. They would get a certain ad. They entered the carrier's site. They get a certain ad, but if they bounce, then it's a matter of, you know, okay, these people have to get those deals. You saw a couple of these apps where it says, you know, visit deals. All right, so maybe that's where I could throw that ad out because I know you clicked on the State Farm site. Maybe you didn't realize that there's a deal underway there. And then all the way to the invested part is where I have a signal that they completed their sign up with Geico for a 1-year insurance plan. And so I'll give them a thank you page, and then I'll be ready to get them to upsell. Second driver, by the way, we cover home insurance, et cetera. So that's where I think, there's a lot they could do they're not capitalizing on, primarily in that discovery and consideration stage. All right, the next thing about consideration is, so we have to find ways to provide, this alternate competitive source for compare.com. In other words, if what shows up at the top are a whole lot of ads for the carriers, then maybe the way we work this out is it's kind of a quid pro quo with the carriers saying, outside of Esurance and Progressive, many of you are not, many of you aren't really providing the breadth of carrier comparisons that are keeping your prospects from signing up for your service. So how about you link to me, just like Zebra links to you, compare.com. Okay, the other thing for consideration here too could be, just more engagement on social media. This again, you're talking about like, tips and insurance criteria. How do I weigh the pros and cons of different insurers? Okay, now at the bottom of the funnel, I don't really have acquisition channels here, but you could argue that this is where the carriers play a big role. So, they do have this ability to have like a seamless, and I would say like near real time connection to the carriers where they can get their quote validated and complete a contract. So they should be sitting pretty well from the amount of carriers they have to help the user in that action stage, in other words, sign the contract. All right. The other thing I think that they're doing very well from a selling perspective is you get this personalized quote based on qualified candidate validations. All right. You don't get that from the lead generators and the estimators. They'll say, in general, this is what Allstate will charge you on some assumed criteria compared to State Farm, based on what we saw over the last couple of years, whereas this one is more personalized. You gave me all your information. Here is your quote. Click here if you want to purchase it. Okay. So that's how you would go about evaluating, is their selling process and acquisition channels align with the customer's buying process? Yes, we have used the channels different ways, the brokers, the TV ads, as well as the AdWords, but they contribute at different parts of that buyer funnel. All right, so now I want to do an overall assessment of that channel contribution. I'll just kind of leave this with you guys, but do the pros and cons again. So from all that information we compiled on what's really important in the funnel, let's size them all up. TV ads, AdWords, brokers, and do it, pros and cons. The pros of TV ads, very effective in brand credibility. It's the greatest opportunity to solicit new carriers, creates a customer awareness of brand and motivation to navigate to their site. Okay. AdWords targets the customers actively looking for car insurance because they're using superlatives like the brand name and some qualifier like cheap or Florida. Okay. The brokers, they are giving you that exposure you want. I thought one of the best things about the brokers is that cost scalability. So I don't sink a whole lot of money in things like ads, broadcast ads through mass communication, right? The brokers, I could try it out, work out a program on a certain set of words, pay for it based on a cost per referral. It's kind of working like the cost per 1,000 impressions or cost per click or something. So at least I know that, okay, this set of AdWords is not working for me, right? And it's also given me some of this keyword mastery I'll find from all those investments that, aha, this is the collection of terms and the phrase that I need to have on my website to boost organic reach. But they all have their problems too. You know, the TV ads, highly expensive, very limited hyper targeting. I mean, you're going to have a lot of wasted eyeballs if you do this based on demographics. People going, I already got insurance, daughter's covered, got the cars I need, don't live in Florida, etc. So the other con associated with AdWords would be that it requires very high word specificity to compete at a low cost. All right, so you're going to have with your brand name, it's going to be very competitive, but it's probably going to cost you a lot. And obviously the cons associated with the brokers, most of you picked this up on your case evaluations. They don't necessarily provide the best customers to compare. You know, it's not really incentivized to deliver long-term customers, which is how they get paid. They get paid a percent of customer lifetime value with the carrier, and they're getting a lot of the browsing type customers. They're just shopping to see if there is savings. And you also have the problem with the broker is they're asking you to fill out a certain amount of information where that information requirement is duplicated in your next step. All right, so now let's get into the nitty gritty of how you set up the A/B test. Remember the question was, why does Brody's supervisor want him to design an A/B test, and what's the objective of the experiment? So you should, most of you captured this pretty well. So the objective is, you know, is a split A/B test comparison of the outcomes from A, your control group, which is just going to be exposed to the standard questionnaire process that withholds the quote to the end. B will be your test group that will show them somewhere when we split test this, the predicted rate. All right. So that's control versus test is basically the objective. Now, why are they doing that? So most of you answered this correctly. I want to determine whether the early estimate at the start of questionnaire will increase outcomes, but somebody's didn't pick up, there's two outcomes we're looking at here. One is the questionnaire completion rate. So in other words, 90% done, bailed out at the 95% point, finished it, etc. But I also want to see its effectiveness in terms of click-through rates. In other words, a click-through going to the carrier site. All right. So that's basically why we're setting this up. And we've got to make sure that everything we do in this study now just contributes to those objectives. All right, so let's dive into what are some of the factors and conditions considered in this test design. A lot of you did really well on this part. All right, so let's start out with, you know, one of the elements has to be the sampling itself and how you do that. Okay, this was highly, highly complicated. And many of us probably didn't realize the detailed requirements across all the split testing criteria. Let's go through some of them. But it starts with making sure that remember you can mitigate a lot of those extraneous variables. I've got to make sure that I have apples to apples comparisons with my control group and my test population. All right. So the sampling should start out with, you know, to whom you present the estimate versus those that will be exposed to the standard process. You want these to look alike, which means I'm going to have to pick states that are fairly cross-representative. I want to make sure that what they're exposed to on the site is similar. Those might be pretty obvious. I'll get into that a little further. But that's what starts it. Do I have two test groups that could basically appear the same, or where it doesn't suggest any kind of market distinction outside of one's got the estimate on it and one doesn't? Okay. Then there's this other consideration on the size and the test period length. So if you remember from the one I did for Florida lawyers, you know, I went with a period of 4 months because, you know, if I go with something longer, you know, I run the risk of interfering with real sales opportunities, and Compare.com had the same thing. You know, you're basically keeping people from seeing those estimates. okay, in order to have a control group. It's also got to be large enough size and a test period to give you meaningful results. So if you find, like in the case of rocket fuel, your control group is only 10% of your total population, you may not get the level of significance to see if it really has an impact, let alone to what degree does it give you lift, in this case, and give you lift and question your responsiveness or question your rate of completion. Okay. The last thing about the sample too is the cross-section representation of it. Because remember, this whole goal has got to be, you want to extrapolate information from this to project onto the entire nation. So this is where, a lot of you talked about, random sampling. Yes, that's important. Stratified sampling could be really complicated, where I say, as long as I cover all ground on demographic quotas, et cetera, well, it's going to come down to the state, So if you look at like what we do in national voting, Iowa, New Hampshire, and North Carolina or South Carolina, I forget which one, they're sort of the proxies for what represents the whole country. Now, if I do that, I can go with a random sample because we're saying their population mix is so identical. I don't have to get into a stratified sample. A random sample will pick up the number of people with driving records, the number of people of certain age groups, all that. And in this case, like they picked Virginia, Georgia, and Texas, saying that's representative enough. Okay, so I've got a pretty good cross section going into this. And I also want to make sure that not only is that population reflective of the whole nation, so I can extrapolate the results across the nation, but I also want to make sure it represents a similar mix of carriers and average rate representation. So for example, if you pick something in Utah, it's like, wow, who's this? I got Travelers, MetLife, and USAA. And if I go to Florida, I start picking up Geico, Progressive, Esurance, et cetera. That's going to be a problem in that the brand itself may influence the excitement towards estimates. And the other thing is, you might have an inordinate number of cheap insurance providers where there's interest in early estimates. Whereas in California, they may have an inordinate number of all states, et cetera, that are normally priced higher, and they may not be as price sensitive. So this is the reason you've got to tailor your sample. Number one, make sure that there seem to be similar characteristics. Look at the size that could give you that significance. Look at the spoiled opportunities and having a control group, not looking at your new feature, and then look at that collection of results. Are they likely to show the same? In this case, those three states apparently show the same collection of carriers. All right, so let's talk about elements of the split test. So you heard one, for example, like we're saying, we're looking at putting a rate estimate on one page in one location and not doing it on the other one. Bottom line of split testing, it's going to say, maybe X% finished on a control group where they weren't exposed to any estimate. I'm sorry, guys, let me blow this up a little bit. And then with the test group, you could look at the measure of lift. In this case, we found that, okay, quote finish, 10% higher, and the click-through link to the carrier, 15% higher. B win. So that's what we're shooting for. But they have a lot of split tests. This is what's going to be really tough. So you look at the split testing conditions when you go through the case. Let me just pick this up. I'm looking at what I have to actually do with the site. I'm looking at things like the input that I'm asking for from users, some of the quote dynamics. So in general, what I saw here was it's at least 5 different elements that I want to split test. Okay. For example, like the location of that estimate quote. Probably want to test it on at least 4 options. Top of the landing page, right of the landing page, top of the post introduction page, right of the post introduction page. I think they end up putting it on the vehicle information page, right? So there's at least 2 pairs of split tests in that one. Probably go, top, right, 1 page versus another page. Then if you remember, they also are looking at different types of attention getting copy / text. All right. So how are you going to do that? And you have to measure that. Well, it might be, 35 to 50 questions, greater than 200 words compared to 35 to 50 questions less than and equal to 200 words. And then I'll see what happens if I drop it to less than 35 questions. So, they should say anything from like maybe 20 to 34. Okay. And then do it for greater than 200 words versus less than or equal to 200 words. And the reason why you're doing the words is both can really hurt. So my response rate drops with more questions, but when the amount of words that I have to fill out for each versus collect a button or hit a button, the rate's going to go down further with those a great number of words. All right, so those are different things that you could test trial. Now, I'm probably also looking at quote dynamics. And by the way, there's going to be, before I get into quote dynamics real quickly here. There's going to be the creative itself. In other words, attention getting. Do you like this statement, this ad, this color, things like that? So, I'm going to have like option 1, 2, and 3, probably at least 2 and more than likely 3 options on which one is the most eye-catching. The quote dynamics. Okay, so how do we want to do this? Do you want to just show one single quote up front? Or let's see what happens if we update the quote per completion step. Now we'll update the quote per completion step with a confidence factor. Or maybe we do it with a completion factor. In other words, I'm showing you the estimate, you're 80% complete. But another way it could be, I'm showing you an estimate, I'm 95% confident based on the information I have. All right, so you're going to want to test trial that because the single quote may not work, but the updated quote per step with confidence factor may. And then finally, what kind of estimate ranges are you going to show? You're going to show just the highest rates, the lowest rates, the average rates. So you have a myriad of split tests. Now, this is going to be a very difficult process. All right, and then, so what do I really want to measure? So what comparisons and measurements are required to validate these conclusions? And I want to back it up by significance to the degree possible. So I like what a lot of you put down as the various comparisons and measurements need to be made. If I summarized it and added a few, this is what I would come up with. Some of those comparisons and measurements relate to the performance measurement. More think of like the outcome. All right. So how are you going to actually measure conversion rate lift? I agree with one student put in there. You go with the test rate minus control rate divided by the control rate. That would be an excellent way of doing this. Probably I want to show just click-throughs going to the carrier. No reason to go any further than that. And that will give me the second output. So I got one output on completion rate, and then I have the other output on click-through the site. Both would be dependent variables, essentially. Now, in addition to this, though, you probably want to take advantage of, I put in here some proxies for exogenous variables so that, ultimately we want to have that regression formula we saw in some prior cases, like what is really driving it, okay? Well, you're going to have what we call exogenous variables, some will call it even endogenous variables. It's not just the ad placed here on the right with a single quote on page 3 drives clicks. I want to know why. Okay, what did it really do? Did the form filling time change? Maybe some went straight to the end. I don't know. What about the time lapse to the first data entry? That could be a sign of confusion. Like, okay, we went with the estimate, and on average, there's a 4-second delay. They don't understand it. Okay. And then I want to look at things like the bounce rates on each page. Like I can find out, okay, that fatigue factor, this is where it hit in. And question number 34, it's way too much information. They bailed out. All right. Now, whether or not it contributes to this controlled experiment, we don't know, but I think you have to think along these lines. I want to know the why. What made this estimate helpful in driving an increased completion rate and click-through rate? The significance, I saw some of these had some pretty exotic analyses. This is where I would say, for a project this size, it really just comes down to confidence levels. Okay. And you can get this, I'll show you how I did this on rocket fuel, just a simple independent sample t-test. Here's control group here on the right. Here's the test group. Now I want to know if there's a significant difference. So I'm going to run this test here and I'll see from my stats at the bottom here that it appears like there's a significant difference. In other words, it's not just coincidence. Okay. You could also set this up to where, this difference between the mean of both samples could be reflected in what we call a z-score. All right, so that's as far as I would take the significance. Now, what controls were used to mitigate extraneous interference? So let's start out with the types of variances that could really impact my having a clear indication of the impact of this estimate versus the control group. I think exposure variance would be one. I would call the other one sampling variance, could be an extraneous factor, and then carrier variance. All right, so let's look at the type of interference and then what we think we can control for. We'll take these one at a time. Under exposure, I would say, you're going to have a lot of variance in driver record, as well as variance in estimate expectations. So for example, some of them may look differently at looking at the highest rates than those looking at the lowest rates. Highest rates, might be, hey, I've got a budget for this. I don't want to get, an unexpected increase, versus lowest rates, they're clearly shoppers, versus averages is what I should expect. So you could set up a control. In this case, remember they set it up to where you will only get estimates on the lowest and highest rates. Now, in terms of that driving record, like, well, my rating is a D versus a B, or it's a 700 versus 800 and credit scores, things like that. We'll hold driving records constant by saying we're only giving you a rate for good driver estimates. So that can't be listed as a possible interfering extraneous variable. All right, but you do have some sampling variances I think you have to be concerned about. They have variance in population characteristics as well as variance in testing times. So this is where they had some state we call homophily. Virginia, Georgia, and Texas seem to be similar to each other, all the way down to their carrier mix, but also being representative of the whole nation. Okay. And there was uniformity in the testing times. In other words, everybody will be examined at a certain hour of the week or certain hour of the day or day of the week, as well as the duration of time we're going to look at this through, so that there's no seasonal interferences, all that. So we'll hold all that constant to make sure that there's no sampling variance. The last thing would be that carrier variance. So, there might be variation in the carriers listed in the quote. So we'll make sure that the states have those similar carrier choices. So in general, I think most of you pick this one up. Those are the kind of controls I'll think about to make sure they have no extraneous interference on what I'm strictly trying to measure. All right, this next one. So usefulness of the results. So I think most of us got this correctly. I would summarize it like this, that, in general, compare the control group offering to customers the estimates at the lowest rate contributed to a greater lift in both dependent variables, the quote completion rate and the click rates to the carrier site. So how can I really be useful? Well, I know that the completion click rates were significantly impacted just by looking at the presentation of the lowest monthly quotes at the start of the questionnaire. So it accomplished my objective, right? They're significantly different in the low quotes that I would see only when that estimate's given me at the start compared to waiting longer. And, that significance was really validated by the fact that I had 2,200 users tracked during this 2-week time period, which should be enough. In other words, that time period permits enough testing to where I should get a significance in that 95% confident level or higher. So when, if you only got 100 people responding, you're going to get non-significance. All right. Now let's take this similar concept, these experiments, and apply it to determining return on investment for digital ads. So very similar to the Compare.com, I'm going to have to set these testing criteria. I'm going to do a split test. I have to be concerned with a control group. I'm looking at things like significance. Okay, but in this case, it's going to be more an ad exposure. So Rocket Fuel, if you remember, they hired this company, or excuse me, they were hired for a company to do a split test to determine the impact that an ad has. This is very common, and I would argue this is where most of your experiences, your experiments are needed, is which ad works, or does an ad versus no ad work? In this case, was you're going to see the ad that we want you to click on versus we're just going to show you a public service announcement, and we'll call that our control group. So the first question you were asked, was it effective, and did additional consumers convert as a result of the campaign? Well, the bottom line, if you put all this together, is you could answer this one pretty significantly. From the data we had, you should see that this is a matter of looking at the conversion rate of ad exposure users to the rate of those exposed just to the public service announcement. Now, where some of you miss this is that to figure out the conversion of ad exposure users, you take the number of exposed users divided by the number of exposed conversions. Some of you divided it by the total number of all users. So let's take a look at where we would see this. You can see at the bottom here, just based on the row count, there's 588,000 total, but you would only get, whatever it is, I won't scroll down there to show you this. I would only get 23,000 some, or excuse me, yeah, 23,524 users exposed just to the public service announcement. So it's a matter of just subtracting the two out. So in this case, you could say that it was successful in that approximately 0.77%, almost 1% of the consumers bought the handbag as a result of the ad campaign. So in a nutshell, this was a very successful campaign. Now, let's take a look at some of the econometrics associated with this. We know we're going to have to look at things like the cost, the profit. We're going to look at lost opportunity cost. Again, like you're wasting a lot of people that could be presented with that ad in order to make them part of the control group. So that has to be factored in. But let's kind of take the data we have and answer each one of these questions so that ultimately what I'm looking for is return on investment. Just like in another exercise we had, customer lifetime value. And I want that return on investment to go right into my Google AdWords dashboard, because I'll know from this one exercise, putting the ad here versus no ad gives me this ROI difference. And now I'm going to actually start targeting my ads to the higher ROI. So how do we calculate it? It's going to start with profit. Now, most of you got this correctly. I think this was fairly straightforward. So how am I going to calculate the profit? Basically, I'm looking at a multiplication of A, the difference in conversion rates between the users and that control group. And remember, we got that already. That's at 0.77%. I'm going to multiply it by the number of exposed users. In other words, those that only saw the ad times the value. So you pretty much have all of that information. The $40 you saw came from the case where an estimate was already done on, the typical value of that conversion. You multiply those three things out and you should have gotten a profit of $173,000. Now we get to the cost side. Okay. The way I can look at this is I'm going to look at the amount of impressions divided by 1,000, because you have to remember they pay $9 per 1,000. M means 1,000 impressions. So this will come out to $131,374. Now let's kind of bring these two things together and figure out our return on investment. So the return on investment is basically that profit minus the cost divided by the cost. So they're looking at, in effect, your cost here is your investment. So you take those two numbers, the profit minus the cost divided by 1,000, okay, and then divide it by the cost, and you'll see that you should have got an ROI of about 32%. But there's one more factor I have to look at. So I also want to see if it's overall profitable by considering that lost opportunity cost. So if you look at a lost opportunity, basically now I'm going to be focused on the control group times lost value from that converted user, and again times that conversion rate. So I'll take the conversion rate, saying this is the lift, the difference rather, this is the lift I get, times the amount of customers it would apply to, times potential loss to $40. And that would only come out to like 7,288. So this campaign is being pretty effective. Now here's where a lot of these had, some real challenges here. All right, let's answer some of these questions about, how did the number of impressions seen by each user influence the effectiveness of advertising? This is a very common question, because I may find now it's a matter of, okay, I know this campaign works. Yeah, but where does it work and when does it work? Okay, so one way to answer where it works is the number of impressions, because probably short of this experiment, how will they ever know what is the block of impressions that's sort of their sweet spot? So now I had done this just on Excel. And let me show you what the data showed me. Now notice what I found here. Now there's different ways you could graph this. This beige smooth line that I have here, that's just my own preference. I like to highlight differences. Okay, so what I did here was I separated my control group from my tested group, right? And I then collected the information one interval range at a time. So let me show you how this was done. Bear with me 1 second here. the data week impressions. It's a big file. So you guys found. Almost there. Okay. All right. So here's how I end up doing this. So I'm looking at convert rate. Now I happen to take the convert rate divided by 1 just so I can get a percentage factor. And I did it for the control group. So you can see that that's this whole top here labeled as 0. So I'm saying take the conversion rate. All right. In this case, I'm looking at, I want the average of that conversion rate over the entire control group that stops at, I think it was, what was it, 25,300. Okay. So I did that across different interval levels. Now, how do I have the interval levels sorted out? I just sorted them. So you can see here, I say, all right, here's what I got, one interval, and I go all the way up to the highest interval group for the control and as well as for the tested group. And this is arbitrary up here, but I want to look at groups of impressions. So in this case, you went through the whole set and you couldn't really see where all the inflection points were. I would argue that you probably have to have something as low as 10 in an interview to see all the necessary inflection points. Let me show you what I mean by that. I'll blow this up some. If I said, let's just see intervals from 1 to 50 impressions compared to 51 to 100 compared to 101 to, all right, what I may be missing some of those inflections. I do recognize there's going to be an experience curve kind of up front. It takes a while for people to capture the essence of the ad. In other words, recognize it. But I want to get kind of granular here too, because exactly where is that? So I'd rather see like 1 to 10 impressions, 11 to 20, etc., rather than jumping really high. Okay. Now I know I'm going to get that point of diminishing returns as well. So this is your classic S type curve, right? Takes a while before people see you. Then it should be going way up with more impressions to, whoa, now I'm at fatigue factor or just a point of diminishing returns. No matter how many impressions you give me, it's not going to make a difference. So I want to get it granular enough. In other words, I want to get pretty tight intervals of comparing control and test along impressions to where I can see these inflection points. Okay, so the next thing I did was I said, all right, now I want to just establish a little formula here. You know, like you guys can kind of make up your own. This is more of a visual exercise. So I said, well, I want to look at the percent lift difference between the control and the tested group. Now that's why I have this line in here. I said, you know, it's easier for me to see, if you see to the right, I want to see difference from 0 versus conversion rates. Here's the actual conversion rate, what's normal, what's not. So I said, well, I'll do this then. So I'll take the amount of conversion difference divided by the rate associated with the control group. All right. And I'm doing it as a mean value. In other words, what is the mean value of the difference across all these for the test group compared to the control group? And then I want to know at each one of these intervals, how does that change? Well, that means I really got to look at the change for, let's say, this 3140 group between the control and the test group relative to the mean change. Now I got a way to visualize relative change as I go from one impression interval to another. And then it allowed me to get these characteristics. Okay. That's as simple as I think this part has to be. Now, let's take a look at the results. Here's what you could conclude. The conversion rate clearly increases with impressions per person. Okay, no doubt. You can see that, from the difference between the test group and the cluster group, and from the white line here that's telling you that, many of these are above the mean average, okay, of these tests, okay. And it's just rising from step one. It says basically at about 40 impressions is where you start seeing a notable difference. So I need at least 40 impressions to capture their attention to a point where they convert, okay. And higher than 130 impressions doesn't really make much difference. In fact, you could say it even drops, okay. So some of the reasons you could, well, why is that? So this is, what decisions do I want to make from this? I want to first be clear on what's causing it before I say, set up my dashboard to where it's anywhere from 41 to 121 impressions. Or by the way, don't boost impressions after 130 because nothing happens. Okay, that's great. I'd like to know why. So one reason could be those that are susceptible to looking at ads. In other words, they have a greater tendency to see the ad and be interested. A lot of times those people get targeted more. So what's that mean? This data could be a little skewed in favor of high conversion users because I set up my ad campaigns to target those people. Their history says high conversion rate. So in effect, that could impact my numbers, saying that the more the impressions, the more I'm picking up those users that are susceptible to ads and conversion. So it's not giving me what I really want. Now, another argument could be I'm looking at critical mass to point of diminishing returns. In other words, like any ad, at the beginning here, it takes a while. It takes like 72 views of a billboard before you can retain the message. Okay. But seeing it 6,000 times doesn't make your interest in a company any better. After you see it 200 times, it's probably good enough. So this is a classic curve you would see throughout marketing. So I'm comfortable that I know why this is working. The takeaway I would have here is, this is interesting. So it's from 41 to 130 impressions. And that's where I'm going to devote my budget, right? I'm going to assume my sales from conversions are greater. There's a greater opportunity for that in that range. And that's where the bulk of my investment will go. Just showing you some evidence of that. I was telling you about, this is typically what happens in marketing and your ads. So again, a certain level of impressions, and beyond that, nothing happens. So it's that kind of like that standard S curve we saw before. Okay, now the next question was, how does the consumer response to advertising vary on different days of the week at different times of the day? And you should have seen this one pretty clearly. All right, so you probably saw, again, using these lines for differences. The second date, which was Tuesday, there was a dramatic difference. Now I'm showing this line here to say, I'm looking at big differences between the test group and the control group. That big difference happens on a Tuesday. It's almost implying then that people tend to buy more on a Tuesday from seeing ads than any other time. And the only other one was 6 years Saturday. So you should have seen that the most optimal time to roll out these campaigns is sometime on Tuesday and sometime on Saturday. Okay, just leave those 2 days even. Okay, at what time is where you get into the next one. It showed some interesting results here, but I thought this is also very typical of what I see like in social media metrics. All right. Your best results seem to come from 8 to 11 a.m. Okay, then nothing at noon, which is kind of expected. Then you come back from lunch, and 1 to 2 is when you get back in your computer and look at what you can buy or start reading something. Then from there, it goes cold until 8 p.m. Okay, and it picks up again at 10 p.m. So this was invaluable, and the data is very significant. That's what you should have concluded from this. Now, some may ask the question, won't it be a combination of both? Yes, you'd have to split test this. In other words, it may be great at 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock on Fridays, and that is even better than the best of our Tuesdays. Or you may find that, Tuesdays at 10 a.m., are better than all the days, or all of a sudden Thursday picks up, but only when it's from, 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock. You could get that far, but I don't know if it's going to help you much, because when you set up your campaigns, you really want to set it up based on how many impressions per person based on the dollars I have. What days do I want to put an inordinate share of dollars on relative to other days in the week? And then what portion do I want to place in each time of the day? And that's pretty much the main things that you need when you try to optimize your campaigns. All right, so the question of significance comes up. This is one again where, you could run like a standard t-test of just making sure that your clusters for the control group are highly distinct from the clusters for your test group. So I ran that. This is where I used SPSS for this. And as I mentioned before, I just used a independent sample t-test. Independent samples t-test, yeah. And notice the conversion rate I'm showing here for the control group and the real ad test. Now, just so far, it's showing that, okay, you're clearly onto something. The mean value of the conversion for the ad test is different than the mean value for the control group. But then that raises the question, but is that really significant? All right, this is where you look at your Levine's test or your F statistic saying, is that really different, or is that just sort of coincidence? Well, the F stat is pretty high. The significance is borderline. All right, you always like to get this at 0.05 and less, but it's significant enough for a project like this to tell me that, you should really count on this ad versus a public service announcement, because that mean level is pretty different. The 0.9% and the 0.8% for advertising, that could be a huge amount of dollars. So I just want to know, is that significantly different, or is that just the way the samples got divided up? Or, was the sample size too small? So was that 23,524, is that small enough? No, the significance that you're getting down here is good enough to say they are distinct. And how does it work? You're basically nullifying the opportunity that they are the same. So that's why we call it equivariance assumed. I'm going to throw in this equation to say, I think these are the same. Tell me otherwise. Saying I'm reasonably certain to just, around 91 to 92% that these are distinct groups. That's all you really want to cover here. So it's just basically giving you some credibility in your analysis on the right hour of the day, the right day of the week, the validity of the program, and then, whether it really works. And then last thing would be, and that difference across impression intervals. I'm reasonably certain that the samples are adequately derived to give me the significance to answer those questions: the impressions, day of the week, hours of the day. And that wraps it up for this whole examination of using marketing experiments in split A/B experimental tests. Alicia, Megan, are you guys still awake?
I am.
Yes, I am too.
Okay, you show yourself, or
No.
you're probably in bed.
Yeah.
Did that work out okay?
Yep, that was great.
Mhm.
Okay, and you saw all the screens?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
How did it compare? Well, so how do you guys think you did on, your groups did good on the compare.com. So was this pretty close to what you're attempted to do on the rocket fuel?
Yes, I think it was very much in line with what we did,
Okay.
or what I did with rocket fuel. So that was good to see.
All right.
Yeah, I don't think I did as well. But I blame the holidays.
Well, that data was tough to work with too. I
Yeah.
mean, when I ran the analysis, he's like, man, it takes forever. And, I got a pretty fast processor. So, but I found that's a very typical example of how we evaluate campaigns. And I thought doing it by the impressions, time of the day of the week, and
Mhm.
that would make such a difference on where you put your money in these digital ad campaigns. So
Mhm.
it was a great
Absolutely.
experience. This is the kind of data you get. Most of us will have volumes in, 500,000 to 1 million of not only the impressions, but that's the number of unique visitors you'll get to your website. Impressions could be, sometimes it's close to 1 billion. But that's the problem a lot of us have, that we just kind of like roll the dice on, all right, put a whole bunch of dollars on targeting these groups, standard time, whatever we think it might be, and not realizing how you could optimize this. Or you may find that 90% of your budget goes and gets released on Tuesday from 8 to 10 a.m. And then the rest of it is Saturdays after 1. That could be invaluable. So I thought it was a pretty good experience for us. And you also saw that you don't have to go crazy with the stats. It's not conjoint analysis, cluster analysis. It's just a matter of, I do want to check out significance just to make sure that it's an adequate test.
Mhm.
Is the sample big enough to give me that significance? Am I seeing a significant difference? So that was the primary goal. With that, I will leave you guys to work on the yes.
I do have a question. When
Yes.
working with the data, do you just pull pivot tables to
Yeah, for the
put
yes.
the data into? Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
just
Perfect.
as required.
Mhm.
Well, this is going to give you exposure to this whole role of digital e-commerce is really moving in a fun area. Everybody's trying to imitate like what Netflix and Amazon did, all the way down
Right.
to small scale e-commerce shops. So this is going to be really critical, but you can't really get the hands-on with the equations. You just have to know it conceptually,
Mhm.
because these are really elaborate machine language, AI type algorithms. But I want you to know how it works, because that way you'll appreciate the power of this. All right. And with that, I'll say good night.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Night.